I love Brother Cliffe to death, but you're wrong on this. I don't know if you all have seen Brother Cliffe. I'm not going to try to pronounce his name. If I try, I will mangle it. But suffice to say, you've probably seen him on different social media platforms, out there sharing the gospel, being an apologetic tool for the kingdom. And he is wonderful. But in this statement, in this case, he is wrong as it relates to women, their role in ministry.
The role of women in leadership in a church, equally committed followers of Christ disagree. Those followers of Christ who say no to women in leadership in a church, I say, okay, I understand why you say that. I disagree. At Grace Community Church, we have women who are elders. We have women who are on the planning team. We have women in pastoral positions. So we are...
Now, there's a problem there. I think women can be used, okay? That's not what I'm saying. But in terms of being elders and pastors, when we actually have qualifications, this is the part that kind of just makes you wonder, wait a second. Again, and let's go with the passage that we love to use because I think it's a good guidance for us. Paul says, I have figuratively applied to myself and Apollos for your sake, that in us you may learn, look what he says, not to exceed what is written. Don't go past what is written. And there are qualifications for pastors and elders. As a matter of fact, we're going to go to 1 Corinthians chapter 2:12. But before we go there, let's go to the passage, to the chapter right before chapter 2 in 1 Timothy. Right after chapter 2 in 1 Timothy chapter 3, where Paul is giving the actual qualifications for the pastors, for the elder, for the presbyter. He says it is a trustworthy statement if a man or a certain person aspires to the office of overseer. Now, this word right here is used as Paul speaks of it, as Peter speaks of it. It is the shepherd. It's also called the overseer, also called the elder. These same words are used interchangeably, so I won't go over that right now. But suffice to say for now, they're the same thing. Elder, pastor. And so the person decides to do that, it's a fine work for that person to desire. Now, so far, it's gender neutral in terms of the word tis, which is for any person, but we don't have to go very far to see that it's requiring the person to be a male. He says he must be the husband of one wife. This is andra, mias gunaikas andras, one woman man or one wife husband. That cannot be a female. So if you're going to have churches like Brother Cliffe's church that have elders and pastors that are women, that's in stark violation to this scripture.
So we are committed to God gives gifts to women, and we are going to acknowledge those gifts and open up the door for the women to use those gifts. Next point.
God does give gifts to women, without question. He gives gifts to a lot of people, male and female. It's not the issue of gifting. It's the issue of order. It's the office. It's what is proper for the Lord. And so, yes, a woman can be gifted. A woman can be used. As a matter of fact, we see in John 4, Jesus speaking to the woman at the well. Now, obviously, she's not understanding fully of the gospel, but she, after having an encounter with Christ, goes back to her village and tells them of a man that she's met who told her about all that she has done. And what do? They go see for themselves. And so clearly God does use women, but in what capacity? That's the issue.
Well, then why does Paul say, I do not allow a woman to pray or prophesy in a church? Well, that's not what he says. He says, I don't allow a woman to speak in a church. Well, just 3 chapters earlier in 1 Corinthians 11, he writes, when a woman prays and prophesies, she's to have her head covered.
Okay, now, and that part is true. Matter of fact, let's go there. In 1 Corinthians chapter 14:34, Paul says the women are to keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but are to subject themselves just as the law says. And so he cannot possibly mean that they can't say anything. Nothing can come out of his mouth because, as he says earlier in the chapter, there are women who are actually speaking. In 1 Corinthians chapter 11, let's go to verse 3. He says, but I want you to understand that Christ is the head of every man, and the man is the head of every woman, and God is the head of Christ. So now he's given this order of how things ought to be in terms of headship for every man who has something on his head while praying or prophesying disgraces his head. But every woman who has her head uncovered while praying or prophesying disgraces her head. Now, the question is, Where is this happening? Now, whether this is in church, whether this is around the body of believers and so forth, so a woman can actually speak. And so the issue is not if she can speak, it's how she can speak, under what authority and in what office. Before we go back to Brother Cliffe, remember what he says in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 12. But I do not allow a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man, but to remain quiet. Notice what he says, though. He says, but I do not allow a woman to teach over, two different words. Now, notice how he's saying there's two things that he doesn't want a woman to do. Not one thing that's mentioned in two different ways. It's two different things that she cannot do. One, she cannot teach the das game, nor, here's the nor, exercise authority. So we have two different words, two different things that she cannot do. She cannot teach over man, and she cannot exercise authority. It's not that she can't teach as exercising authority over man. No, that's just not how the Greek works. It is two things that she cannot do. She cannot have authority over him, nor can she be in the position in the body teaching a man, but to remain silent. And then he gives the qualifications. And the qualifications are important because he's going to give qualifications as to why this is happening, but it's not in the scriptures. He gives qualifications. Paul does. He says, for it was Adam who was first created, and then Eve. And so he goes all the way back to Genesis. We'll go back to that in a second, but let's finish listening to him. He's going to bring up something that the Bible never talks about.
What's the matter, Paul? Did you forget what you wrote 3 chapters earlier? From 1 Corinthians 14 back to 1 Corinthians 11? I don't think so. What's happening is, I think, this. Have you ever seen the movie Yentl? Barbara Streisand plays a young Jewish woman.
Now, as he's going into his analogy, notice what he says, what's happening, I think, not what the scripture says. And therein lies our problem.
Guess what? She's not allowed to go to church, synagogue, to school. She's not allowed to go to school. What does she have to do to get an education? She has to disguise herself as a guy in order to get an education. It was really sexist, incredibly chauvinistic at that time. And it still is often today.
Now, let's think about something. He's saying that at this time it was incredibly sexist. However, Paul didn't think to bring that up. The Lord didn't think to bring that up. And oh, by the way, where they are is a whole lot less sexist than in other parts that the church has established.
So, remember, these women probably in Corinth were abusing their new freedom.
And again, notice what he says. These women probably were abusing their roles.
And they were going nuts. And it's within the context of disorder in worship that Paul writes, I don't allow a woman to speak in a church. All right? But then he goes on and obviously has women speaking in church as they pray and prophesy in church. So he's...
Now, is that what it says? One, this is happening as Paul's writing this. They are in two different places, in Ephesus and in 1 Corinthians. But he didn't bring that up. Paul didn't make that point. As a matter of fact, even in his letter to the Ephesians, he didn't bring that up. He didn't bring about disorder. As a matter of fact, let's be honest, most of the disorder was with men. And so if disorder was the issue, he would have also had some sort of stipulation with men, but he doesn't. His stipulations, his restrictions are with women. Now, notice also something about this text in 1 Corinthians 11, about the woman's praying or prophesying, which is just to give a revelation. Is this actually in church? You might argue that. That's fine if you do, but it doesn't specifically say that. Now he goes on into verse 17, talking about some other things, and then he talks about coming together in the church. And so are the first few verses, is that also taking place inside the church? Doesn't say. And so it might be wise not to make a dogmatic statement about this happening in the church. It may very well be, but the whole point is, more to the point, is that Paul is not giving stipulations to say that the reason is because women are acting unorderly or disorderly. Paul could have simply said that. Paul could have easily spoke about how they were behaving in a disorderly fashion, or how the women were, but he didn't do that. And so I think that's also wrong for him to bring that in.
He's addressing a very specific situation, I am convinced, where women are abusing their newfound freedom. Now let's take this one step further. An atheist says to me, you know, Cliff, what I really resent is all the sexism and chauvinism in our culture. And I say, yes, I agree with you totally. It's sick, it's unfortunate, it's degrading and dehumanizing of a woman. But let me ask you something, my atheist friend. Why is woman valuable? And the answer that I get often to that question is shocking. Well, because she's just as good as a man. What? You got to be kidding me. If you think the value of a woman is based on she's just as valuable as a man, give me a break.
Now, what he's doing is he's trying to make a point about women being able to preach because they're just as valuable as a man. But he's going to make a statement here that is just incorrect.
The question is, why is man valuable? Why is woman valuable? Why are any of us valuable? And if we simply come from primordial soup, none of us have any innate value. The Bible insists all human beings are created in the image and likeness of God, and that is why male and female have value and are equal, because
there it is. Male and female are not equal, meaning they are the same. They are not equal. The Bible never tells us that they are equal in that regard. There are some things that women are more apt to do that are suitable for them. There's something that are there for male. There are certain roles, even the way we dress. As a matter of fact, we've been told not to even dress a certain way, not to confuse or blur the lines. There is a distinction that God made. Remember, God made male and made female. He made them. As a matter of fact, let's go to Genesis and notice what happens. God shows up, the Lord is walking, and notice after they sin, what happens? Verse 9 of chapter 3, then the Lord called to the man and said to him, where are you? Adam, where are you? He's not asking for, hey, Adam and Eve, where are you guys at? No, he's asked, where are you? And then we go to verse, the latter verses where he says to the woman, verse 16, I will greatly multiply your pain, and in childbirth, in pain you will bring forth children, yet your desires, what he says, will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. This is what God says as a result of the fall. And notice this is the very same thing that Paul refers to in 1 Timothy when he forbids a woman to have authority or to speak over man. Same. So Paul brings this up. Why? Because this is how God had ordained it. Not because women are less than or don't have the ability, but it's an issue of order. It's an issue of not of ability, but of what God has determined it to be. And so again, we have to stay with the text. Do not exceed what is written. I understand more and more today, we're going to have people that are going to push against this. We're going to have more and more folks who are going to say, no, women this, women that. And it's not to minimize women or anything like that. But again, we've got to go with what the scripture says. And if a person has a problem with that, if anyone has a problem or issue with what the text says, you can have a problem with me, but I didn't write it, nor did anyone else. Take it up with the author. Take it up with God. So, Brother Cliffe, I love all the other work that you do in terms of apologetics, but in this case, yeah, brother, you're wrong. Amen.